Hey everyone, it's Dr. Marcon. This is chapter 17 on the endocrine system. So anything that ends in ology means the study of. Endocrinology is the study of hormones and endocrine glands. So we know that the endocrine system interacts closely with the nervous system, especially in helping to maintain homeostasis within our body. We have organs of the endocrine system that are a dispersed group of ductless glands. Remember, we talked about endocrine glands. There's an N. There are no ducts with endocrine glands. Endocrine organs secrete messenger molecules called hormones. We have pure endocrine glands. This includes the pituitary gland, the pineal gland, thyroid and parathyroid glands, as well as the adrenal glands. These are also known as the suprarenal glands because they are located on top of the kidneys. Within the adrenal glands, we have two parts. We have the outer adrenal cortex as well as the inner adrenal medulla. We also have organs that contain a large proportion of endocrine cells. These are cells that secrete hormones. So we have the pancreas. The pancreas is a very large, major endocrine gland. It actually, when we talk about the digestive system, the pancreas has both endocrine and exocrine functions. Another organ that has a large portion of endocrine cells includes the thymus. We have the gonads, either the testes in males or the ovaries in females. And then we also have the hypothalamus in the brain. And this is a neuroendocrine organ. And there are some organs that contain some endocrine cells, not a whole lot, but just some. So this includes the heart, the digestive tract, kidneys, as well as the skin. We know that endocrine cells are of an epithelial origin. So here is a view of the location of the major endocrine glands. So this is an anterior view of the body, which will show the pineal gland located in the brain, as well as the hypothalamus and pituitary glands. So these three glands are located in the brain, and we'll learn more about them when we get to the nervous system. We'll be able to locate them. The thyroid gland is located in the anterior neck, along with the parathyroid glands that are posterior to it, and these are located on the dorsal aspect of the thyroid gland. The thymus is a gland that is inferior to the sternum. We talked about the sternum being a major bone of the axial skeleton. So here is the thymus. The pancreas is in the center of the abdomen here. Superior to the umbilicus. We can see that when we get into the digestive system, the head of the pancreas is closely associated with part of the duodenum, which is the small intestine. In the tail, we can see kind of abuts or is associated with the left kidney. And then in males, the testes is here located within the pelvis. And then in females, of course, there are the ovaries, again located within the pubic region. I'm sorry, so the testes are here, the ovaries are here in a female patient. So these are the locations of the major endocrine glands. So now we're going to talk about hormones. We have different classes of hormones. We have amino acid based hormones and we have steroid hormones. Steroid hormones are derived from cholesterol. Basic hormone action includes circulating throughout the body in the blood vessels. They will often be secreted by an endocrine gland, and then the hormones will then travel through the blood vessels to its effector cells or effector organs. So hormones will influence only specific tissue cells. These are called target cells. And a hormone can have different effects on different target cells. With regards to control of hormone secretion, secretion is triggered by one of three major types of stimuli. You have humoral. Humoral stimuli is the simplest of endocrine control mechanisms. You basically have secretion in direct response to changing ions or nutrient levels in the blood. For example, parathyroid hormone or the parathyroid gland, monitors the amount of calcium in the body. And the parathyroid gland will respond to a decrease of calcium by secreting a specific hormone to counteract that decrease in calcium. Neural control of hormone secretion. This is when we have sympathetic nerve fibers that will stimulate cells in the adrenal medulla. So the center of the adrenal gland is influenced by sympathetic nerve fibers. This induces the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. So sympathetic nervous system, think your fight or flight response. You know, if you're being chased by a large dinosaur or, you know, those types of situations, you want the body to release epinephrine, norepinephrine to prepare you for fight or flight. So that is under neural control. Another type of neural control is when you have stimuli received from other glands. Certain hormones will signal secretion of other hormones. For example, the hypothalamus in the brain secretes releasing hormones, or specific hormones that will stimulate the pituitary gland, which in turn will also secrete hormones to stimulate other glands. So here are the three types of endocrine stimuli. So you have humoral stimulus, neural stimulus, and hormonal stimulus. So let's go back actually to this slide. This third one should say hormonal stimulus. Sorry about that. That's a typo. So third, let me cross that out. Cross. This should say hormonal stimulus control. Hormonal. Okay. So again, the three types of hormonal secretion control. First, you have humoral stimulus, where hormones or the glands monitor the amount of certain ions in the body, such as the parathyroid gland, located on the dorsal aspect of the thyroid. Then you have neural stimulus, where hormone is released by neural inputs. And then you have hormonal stimulus, where hormone release is caused by another hormone, also known as a tropic hormone. So example of this is the hypothalamus, basically secreting releasing hormones, having its effect on the anterior pituitary gland, which will then in turn secrete specific hormones that will go to the different endocrine glands. Feedback loops. Feedback loops help control hormone secretion. If, for example, the blood concentration of a hormone goes below a minimum level, this will basically induce an endocrine gland to secrete more hormone. If the blood concentration of a hormone goes over the maximum, this will tell the endocrine gland to stop secreting that hormone. So hormone production is halted. So you have a positive feedback mechanism where if you have a below or low levels of a hormone, this will induce the endocrine gland to secrete more hormone. And then you have a negative feedback loop where if there's a high level of hormone, you don't need it anymore. So this high level will basically tell the endocrine gland to stop producing that hormone. So positive feedback and negative feedback loops. So now we're going to get right into it. We're going to talk about the different glands that make up the endocrine system. The first gland we're going to talk about is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland secretes 9 major hormones. The pituitary gland is attached to the hypothalamus by the infundibulum. So this is sort of a tract that connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. And there are 2 basic divisions of the pituitary gland. You have the anterior lobe and the posterior lobe. The anterior lobe is also known as the adenohypophysis, and the posterior lobe is known as the neurohypophysis. The anterior lobe has three major divisions. There's the pars distalis, the pars intermedia, and pars tuberalis. Whereas the posterior lobe has two major divisions, the pars nervosa and infundibulum. I'm not going to focus too much on the anatomy of the different lobes of the pituitary gland. I would focus mostly on the types of hormones that are secreted by each lobe. So here we see a gross picture of the pituitary gland. So we can see that the pituitary gland is located here. This is pituitary, also known as hypophysis. We can see that the hypothalamus connects to the posterior gland here by an infundibulum. So we have an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe. And this is part of the hypothalamus. So part A will show you a sagittal view of the brain. B is an enlargement of the central area in part A that shows the pituitary or hypophysis gland. This gland here is actually superior to the brainstem but inferior to certain structures in the brain. We're not going to get into it right now because we're not going to go into neuro right now. But know that it's definitely superior to the brainstem, inferior to the hypothalamus, for example, the thalamus, corpus callosum. That's not important right now because we're not going over neuroanatomy. We just want to look at the actual pituitary gland. So here in part C, you will see a close-up of the pituitary gland. So we have the anterior pituitary gland here, this dark red area, and then we have the posterior pituitary gland. Anterior lobe, posterior lobe, but I usually call them anterior pituitary, posterior pituitary. So this histomicrograph is a close-up of the different lobes that shows the different cells that make up the anterior lobe and the different cells that make up the posterior lobe. Again, we're not going to get too much into that histo right now. So the anterior lobe, what I want you to focus on are the hormones that are secreted by the anterior pituitary gland. So we know the pars distalis of the anterior lobe is the largest division of the anterior lobe, contains 5 different endocrine cells, and then makes and secretes 7 different hormones. These are tropic hormones. So tropic hormones regulate hormone secretion by other glands. And this includes thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. So TSH, ACTH, FSH, and LH. We also have growth hormone. I believe this is prolactin releasing. Actually, it's just prolactin. And then we have MSH, which is melanocyte stimulating hormone. These act directly on non-endocrine target tissues. A really good way, a nice mnemonic to help you remember some of the major hormones secreted by the anterior lobe is flat pig. So F L A T P P I G. So F stands for FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone. L stands for luteinizing hormone. A is your adrenocorticotropic hormone, or your ACTH. Then you have your TSH, which is your thyroid stimulating hormone. P is your prolactin, and G stands for growth hormone. So flat pig will kind of help you remember at least 6 of the major hormones that are secreted by the anterior lobe. So thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, are produced by thyrotropic cells within the thyroid gland. So these actually the thyrotrophic cells are in the anterior lobe, but these cells will release this stimulating hormone to signal the thyroid gland to secrete thyroid hormone. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, will signal the adrenal cortex, the outer layer of the adrenal gland, to secrete hormones that help cope with stress. Your gonadotropins are produced by your gonadotropic cells. This includes your follicle-stimulating hormone and your luteinizing hormones. For females especially, we take a look at these hormones, especially when we want to consider ovulation and the regulation of the menstrual cycle. Melanocyte-stimulating hormone, or MSH, MSH functions in appetite suppression. And then prolactin are produced by prolactin cells. This hormone targets milk-producing glands in the breast, which will stimulate milk production after the birth of a baby. Growth hormone, also known as somatotropic hormone, is produced by somatotropic cells. This stimulates body growth by stimulating increased protein production as well as growth of the epiphyseal plates. So this hormone has its it directs its activity to the developing bones. Also stimulates growth directly and indirectly by liver secretion of insulin-like growth factor 1. So growth hormone being a very important hormone for growth and development. Then we have endocrine cells of the pars distalis. These are clustered in spheres and branching cords, and there are 5 types. The 5 types of anterior lobe are classified as 3 categories. We have acidophils, basophils, and chromophobes. So these are the cell types that will produce different hormones. So this is a nice table that summarizes the hormone cell type as well as its target organ and effects, and then its effects of hyposecretion and hypersecretion. So what happens if there's too little of this hormone or too much of this hormone? So this is actually a really great table to kind of study if you just want a quick overview of the different hormones. So for example, we have thyroid stimulating hormone has its effect on the thyroid gland, will stimulate the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormones. If we have a decrease in our thyroid stimulating hormone, it causes a condition known as cretinism in children and myxedema in adults. If we have an increase of secretion, we have hyperthyroidism, which has its effects similar to that of Graves' disease, in which the antibodies will mimic thyroid-stimulating hormone. The next hormone is adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, having its effects on the adrenal cortex, that outer part of the adrenal gland, which promotes the release of glucocorticoids and androgens, and to a lesser extent mineral corticoids. A low blood level is very rare. However, if you have an increase of these hormones, you have what's known as Cushing's disease. Follicle-stimulating hormone, or secreted by the gonadotropic cells, has its effects on ovaries and the testes. In females, follicle-stimulating hormone stimulates the ovarian follicle maturation and estrogen production. In males, it stimulates sperm production. A decrease usually causes a failure of sexual maturation. Increase, there are no real important effects that are noted. So with luteinizing hormone, again, target organs include the gonads, such as the ovaries and testes. In females, we know that luteinizing hormone, when we have that spike of luteinizing hormone once a month, this triggers ovulation and also stimulates the ovarian production of estrogen and progesterone. In males, it promotes testosterone production. Its increase or decrease amounts is usually the same as FSH. Growth hormone, target organs include the liver, muscle, bone, cartilage, and other tissues, help stimulate protein synthesis and somatic growth. mobilizes fats, and increases blood glucose. Effects of hyposecretion, meaning a low amount secreted into the blood. You have what's known as pituitary dwarfism in children. Hypersecretion of growth hormone includes gigantism in children and acromegaly in adults. For prolactin, its effects are on the breast secretory tissue, promotes lactation. A decrease in prolactin, you'll have poor milk production in nursing women. An increase, you have inappropriate milk production, also known as galactorrhea. And then a stoppage or cessation of the menstrual cycle or menses in females, and it can also cause impotence in males. So that's it for the pituitary gland. Next, we are going to talk about the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a very important center. It controls secretion of anterior lobe hormones and exerts control by secreting releasing hormones, which will then tell the anterior lobe to release hormones, and also secretes inhibiting hormones, which will turn off secretion of the anterior lobe hormones. So the releasing hormones secreted by the hypothalamus are secreted like neurotransmitters. They will enter a primary capillary plexus, travel in the hypophyseal portal veins to a secondary capillary plexus, and from there the hormones are secreted by the anterior lobe, enter general circulation, and will then travel to target organs. So, anterior pituitary and hypothalamic hormones are released into special blood vessels, the hypophyseal portal system. This controls the release of anterior pituitary hormones. Hypothalamic neurons are synthesized releasing and inhibiting hormones. So we have both releasing and inhibiting hormones secreted by the hypothalamus, which will then have its effects on the anterior pituitary lobe or anterior pituitary gland. So this slide shows you when the hypothalamus is appropriately stimulated, hypothalamic neurons will secrete releasing or inhibiting hormones into the primary capillary plexus. So from there, hypothalamic hormones will travel through the portal veins to the anterior pituitary gland. There they will stimulate or inhibit the release of hormones that are made in the anterior pituitary. In response to releasing hormones, the anterior pituitary will secrete hormones into a secondary capillary plexus, which will then empty into the general circulation to go to its target effector cells or effector organs. We can see that the abbreviations for the different hormones. So GH stands for growth hormone, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone is FH, luteinizing hormone is LH, and then prolactin is PRL. So the posterior lobe of the anterior pituitary is structurally part of the brain. Its axons make up the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Try to say that 5 times fast. Hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. This arises from neuronal cell bodies in the hypothalamus. You have your supraoptic nucleus and your paraventricular nucleus. And in a moment, I'll show you a good mnemonic that'll help you remember the different nuclei in the hypothalamus and the hormones that are released. So the posterior lobe doesn't really make hormones. It just stores and releases hormones that are made in the hypothalamus. It will release 2 peptide hormones, antidiuretic hormone, also known as your vasopressin or ADH, and then your oxytocin. Oxytocin is that cuddling hormone. It's the hormone that's released when after the delivery of the baby. It encourages mother-baby bonding. It's also that hormone that is released when you first fall in love and you're all cuddly and happy, and you see, your significant other. So this is known as the cuddling hormone. So a way to remember your posterior lobe hormones and the nuclei that secrete them in the hypothalamus is the mnemonic VSOP. VSOP. So if you've ever tried the alcohol, if you're 21, Remy Martin VSOP, this will help you remember the optic nuclei and the hormones. So V stands for vasopressin, or your antidiuretic hormone. S stands for supraoptic nuclei. So the supraoptic nuclei are what secrete and make your vasopressin. Then you have your oxytocin. Oxytocin is made by the paraventricular nuclei in the hypothalamus. So VSOP, Remy Martin VSOP. So here we see the posterior pituitary gland. Nerve impulses will travel down the axons of the hypothalamic neurons, causing hormone release from their axon terminals in the posterior pituitary. So we see that our hypothalamic neurons will synthesize oxytocin or vasopressin, also known as antidiuretic hormone or ADH. These are then transported down the axons of the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract to the posterior pituitary lobe or posterior pituitary gland. Oxytocin and ADH are then stored in axon terminals in the posterior pituitary, and then when associated hypothalamic neurons fire, the nerve impulses arriving at the axon terminals cause either oxytocin or ADH to be released into the blood. So ADH, also known as vasopressin, is made in the supraoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus. This hormone targets kidneys to resorb water, so basically prevents you from releasing water out into your urine. So basically it helps concentrate urine. So we're keeping water into our inside our bodies. Oxytocin, produced in the paraventricular nuclei or nucleus, induces smooth muscle contraction of reproductive organs, also ejects milk during breastfeeding, and signals contraction of the uterus during childbirth, and also is that cuddling hormone that encourages mother-baby bonding. So again, here is a table that summarizes the hormone as well as the cell types that secrete the hormone, the target organs and their effects, as well as the effects of a decrease in secretion or increased secretion, so hyposecretion and hypersecretion. So ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, again made from the neurons in the supraoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus. Target organs include kidneys, specifically the kidney tubules, so stimulates the kidney tubule cells to resorb water, so bring water back to the body, therefore forming a concentrated urine. A decrease in ADH causes a condition known as diabetes insipidus, which mimics the symptoms of diabetes, but is more due to a decrease in ADH. Increase of ADH is a syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion, or SIADH. And those are the symptoms or the conditions that happen if you have a hypo or hypersecretion of ADH. Oxytocin, made from the neurons in the paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. Effects include the uterus, stimulates uterine contractions, initiates labor. In the breast, it initiates milk ejection, and also it encourages mother-baby bonding, as well as those feelings of, you could probably say, affection and love towards a significant other, especially when you first start dating them or seeing them. So next gland that we'll be talking about is the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is located in the anterior neck, and this is the largest purely endocrine gland. It is composed of follicles and areolar connective tissue, and produces two very important hormones that we'll talk about. We have thyroid hormone and calcitonin. So here we see the gross anatomy of the thyroid gland. we have different parts of the thyroid gland. We have two lobes. We have a right and left lateral lobe. So if this is the patient's right and this is the patient's left, we have a right lateral lobe and a left lateral lobe, and then we have this band of tissue called the isthmus that kind of joins the two lobes together anteriorly. Some important structures to note, especially if we're doing surgery in this area. The neck is actually a very delicate region because there's lots of important structures, lots of important blood vessels and nerves that we have to be very careful with when we're doing any sort of neck surgery. The superior thyroid artery is superior to the right lateral lobe of the thyroid. So here would be the superior thyroid artery. Lateral is the inferior thyroid artery. Yes. So superior thyroid artery is superior to the right lateral lobe of the thyroid gland, and lateral is the inferior thyroid artery. And then again, we have that isthmus, that band of tissue that is directly superior to the trachea, and is the structure that kind of unites the two glands, or the two lobes of the gland. Here we see a histo picture of the parafollicular cells as well as the thyroid follicles. So the parafollicular cells will secrete the hormone calcitonin, whereas the follicular cells that surround the follicles, the colloid-filled follicles of the thyroid gland, the follicular cells will secrete thyroid hormone. So here are the follicular cells of the thyroid gland, and here are the colloid-filled follicles. The parathyroid glands will lie on the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. They contain two types of endocrine cells. We have the parathyroid cells, which of course secrete parathyroid hormone, which is important. It increases of blood concentration of calcium. And then we have oxyphil cells. I would focus mostly on the parathyroid cells that secrete parathyroid hormone. Again, kind of regulates blood concentration of calcium and will increase blood concentration of calcium should there be any decreases of calcium in the body. So here we see posterior surface of the thyroid, and we can see these four small little bean-like structures. These are the parathyroid glands. Again, important because they secrete parathyroid hormone, which monitors calcium levels within the body. So again, parathyroid gland is within the thyroid, and the thyroid is on either side of the pharynx and esophagus. So here is part of the pharynx, and here is the tube known as the esophagus. And just a histo slide showing the parathyroid cells that secrete parathyroid hormones. So these are the cells here. Secrete parathyroid hormone, again, important for monitoring calcium levels, and will increase calcium in the presence of decreased levels. The next glands we're going to talk about are the adrenal or suprarenal glands. Suprarenal glands because they kind of sit on top of the superior poles of the kidneys. So the adrenal glands are pyramid-shaped glands located on the superior surface of each kidney. They're supplied by about 60 suprarenal arteries, so really good blood supply. Nerve supply is almost exclusively sympathetic fibers. Again, sympathetic nervous system, important for that fight or flight response. And basically, it's two endocrine glands in one, because we have an inner and outer part to the adrenal glands. So the inner cluster of neurons is known as the adrenal medulla. It's derived from the neural crest and is part of the sympathetic nervous system. And then we have the outer adrenal cortex. The outer adrenal cortex forms the bulk of the gland, derived from somatic mesoderm. And then all adrenal hormones help the body cope with danger, terror, or stress. Then we have different cells within the adrenal medulla. We have our medullary chromaffin cells, which are modified post-ganglionic sympathetic neurons. They secrete the amine hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine. Again, These are also known as your adrenaline hormones. So epinephrine, norepinephrine enhance the fight or flight sympathetic response, and these hormones are stored in secretory vesicles. They're arranged in spherical clusters and some branching cords. Now, the outer adrenal cortex is responsible for secreting lipid-based steroid hormones. The cortex is composed of 3 layers or zones. So you have GFR, which is also known as, we'll learn about GFR in kidneys. But first we have the zona glomerulosa. These cells are arranged in spherical clusters. We have the zona fasciculata. These cells are arranged in parallel cords and contain lipid droplets. And then you have the zona reticularis. These cells are arranged in a branching network. So the hormones that are secreted are considered corticosteroids, and adrenal corticosteroids have 2 main classes. We have your mineralocorticoids and our glucocorticoids. And then you have aldosterone. Aldosterone is the hormone secreted by the outermost zona glomerulosa. Aldosterone is secreted in response to a decline or decrease in blood volume or blood pressure. This is the terminal hormone in the renin-angiotensin mechanism. So this hormone actually is important for regulation of blood pressure. Cortisol. Cortisol is our stress hormone. Cortisol is the main type of glucocorticoid. It's secreted by the zona fasciculata and zona reticularis. Again, helps the body deal with stressful situations. This is, one of the hormones that is secreted, especially in periods of stress, like we have, to convert or at least for me, I know I had to convert all my face-to-face classes, I had 3 of them last semester, to an online format. My cortisol levels were probably through the roof because it was definitely one of the most stressful situations I've ever been through. So here we can see the different layers of the adrenal gland, the different zones, and then, what hormones are secreted in the different zones. So in the zona glomerulosa, which is the outermost layer, we have aldosterone, and then zona fasciculata, we have our cortisol and our sex hormones or androgens. And then with the adrenal medulla, so we have the cortex, the outer cortex, and the inner medulla. Within the adrenal medulla, we have cells that will secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine, again, those hormones that are responsible for our fight or flight response. So in the cortex, one of the mnemonics we used to learn in medical school was the deeper you go, the sweeter it is. So aldosterone, basically being that hormone that regulates blood pressure through sodium chloride and salts, and then cortisol and androgens, cortisol being glucocorticoid, and then androgens being that hormone that kind of regulates the sex hormones. Anyways, so here is a figure that shows, stress and the adrenal gland. We can see different responses to either short-term stress and long-term stress. So we can see on the left side our responses to short-term stress, and then on the right side our responses to prolonged stress. So stress signals will travel through the hypothalamus, and the nerve impulses will be conducted through the spinal cord, T8 through L1, and then through the preganglionic sympathetic fibers, and then to the adrenal medulla. So that inner part, or inner layer of the lipid-based hormones. So it goes through catecholamines, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. So these are amino-based hormones. So these catecholamines, this is what epinephrine and norepinephrine are categorized as, will then be secreted into the bloodstream. And then you have your various short-term stress responses, such as increase in heart rate, increase in blood pressure, dilation of the bronchioles. So these are the ducts in your lungs to kind of allow for more oxygenation to occur, so that we can transport more oxygen to the tissues to be prepared to run away. The liver will convert stored glycogen to glucose and release the glucose to the blood, so we have more blood sugar, more energy for movement. And then we have blood flow changes. So usually what will happen is we'll shut down the organs of our digestive system because we don't need them for fight or flight. So we have a reduction of digestive system activity and urine output, and then metabolic rates will also increase. So that is the short-term stress response. For prolonged stress, the hypothalamus will release the corticotropin-releasing hormone. So stress, again, will travel through the hypothalamus, release the releasing hormone, corticotropin-releasing hormone, and then this will travel to the corticotropic cells of the anterior pituitary. Once it goes to the anterior pituitary, we have our ACTH that is being secreted via the bloodstream, which will then reach the adrenal cortex, okay, that outer layer of the adrenal gland. From there, the adrenal cortex will secrete our steroid hormones. Steroid hormones, for example, we have our mineralocorticoids, which produce aldosterone. This will allow the kidneys to retain sodium and water and blood volume, allowing for the blood volume and blood pressure to rise. And then with the release of glucocorticoids, the response includes having our proteins and fats converted to glucose or broken down for energy. Blood sugar or blood glucose will increase, and we have suppression of the immune system. So again, these are long-term stress responses. Moving on to the pineal gland. The pineal gland is a pinecone-shaped gland located on the roof of the diencephalon. We have cells called the pineal oocytes that are arranged in spherical clusters and branching cords. Pineal sand is radio-opaque, meaning they are going to show up as white, just like our bones in an x-ray. So pineal sand is used as a landmark to identify other brain structures in x-ray films. Pineal oocytes secrete melatonin, and melatonin we know is a hormone that helps regulate our sleep cycle or our circadian rhythms. The pancreas is located in the posterior abdominal wall, contains both endocrine and exocrine cells. So exocrine cells, also known as acinar cells, these cells are responsible for secreting enzymes, digestive enzymes that help break down our food. And we'll talk about that when we get to the digestive system. But these are exocrine cells. Exocrine, again, these glands do have ducts and allow for hormones to travel through ducts. Endocrine cells, no ducts. The endocrine cells within the pancreas are also known as our pancreatic islet cells. We have alpha and beta cells that secrete important hormones for the regulation of metabolism in our body. And there's about 1 million islets that are scattered throughout the pancreas. So the main endocrine cell types, we have our alpha and beta cells. Alpha cells secrete glucagon. Notice there's an A in glucagon. This will help you remember that alpha cells do secrete glucagon. And glucagon basically is a hormone that signals the liver to release glucose from our stored form, which is glycogen, and helps raise our blood sugar. So if we're in states of starvation and we don't have any available food sources, the pancreas will secrete the hormone glucagon to help release the stored sugar in our liver to kind of raise our blood sugar. Then we have our beta cells being the important cells that secrete insulin. We've all heard about insulin. Insulin will signal most body cells to take up glucose from the blood. So think of insulin sort of as a transport hormone that will take our blood sugars to the tissues that need the blood sugar, which is basically all of our tissues. So Insulin also promotes storage of glucose as glycogen in the liver and help lower blood sugar. So insulin is very important for taking the blood sugar that we get from our food and transporting the sugar to our tissues that need them for energy. And we've heard of the condition of diabetes, which is actually where we have abnormal secretion of insulin or no secretion of insulin at all. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Pancreatic islet cells also contain two rare cell types. We have our delta cells. Delta cells secrete somatostatin. Somatostatin is a hormone that inhibits the secretion of insulin and glucagon. We also have our PP cells, which secrete pancreatic polypeptide, which also may inhibit exocrine activity of the pancreas. The thymus. The thymus is a gland that's located in the lower neck and anterior thorax, mainly the mediastinum. This gland is a very important immune organ. This is where we have maturation of our lymphocytes, and the lymphocytes will mature and become T lymphocytes. So this is the site at which T lymphocytes will arise from the precursor cells. We have transformation of the lymphocytes that's stimulated by thymic hormones. And we have two peptide hormones that are secreted by the thymus. So we have thymopoietin and thymosin. Next, we have the gonads. So gonads, again, are important endocrine glands. They are the main source of sex hormones coming from the testes and the ovaries. So in males, we have interstitial cells that secrete our androgens, primarily testosterone. And testosterone is important for the formation of sperm, as well as maintaining secondary sex characteristics in males. In females, we have the ovaries. The ovaries secrete estrogen, again, an important hormone for maintaining secondary sex characteristics. And progesterone. Progesterone is the hormone that prepares the uterus for pregnancy. So once there is fertilization of the egg by the sperm, the ovaries will secrete progesterone that will basically tell the body that it's pregnant and will stop ovulation of any more eggs. Other endocrine structures that we need to consider, we do have endocrine cells that occur in other places, not glands in particular, but other structures within the body. So for example, the heart, within the heart we have the atria, which are chambers that contain the hormone atrial natriuretic peptide. Within the GI tract, we have our enteroendocrine cells and the placenta. The placenta will sustain the fetus and secrete several steroid protein hormones. The kidneys. Within the kidneys, we have the juxtaglomerular complex, or the JGA, that secrete renin. Renin, again, being part of the system, the renin-angiotensin system that helps regulate blood volume and blood pressure. We also have endothelial cells and interstitial connective tissue that secrete erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is an important hormone that is important for the blood cell formation, specifically the erythrocyte. And of course, we have the skin. Within the skin, we have modified cholesterol molecules that will convert a precursor to vitamin D. So, of course, it is very important that we sometimes get away from the library or get away from our rooms to get some sunlight so that we produce vitamin D. Vitamin D being an important vitamin for bone growth. So, guys, step away from your computer every now and then, put on your mask, and try to get outside and get some sunlight to make some vitamin D. So earlier we talked about pituitary gland disorders that might be due to a hypersecretion or hyposecretion of specific hormones, and I'll go over them really quickly. For example, if we have a hypersecretion of growth hormone in children, we'll have a situation or a condition known as gigantism. In adults, it's known as acromegaly. If we have a hyposecretion of growth hormone, it's known as pituitary dwarfism. Diabetes insipidus. Diabetes insipidus occurs when the pars nervosa does not make enough antidiuretic hormone or vasopressin. Diabetes insipidus will exhibit the same symptoms as diabetes that we see in diabetes mellitus patients, the three P's. So the 3 P's being polyuria, polydipsia, and polyphagia, which we'll talk about when we get into diabetes mellitus. So diabetes mellitus is actually a disorder of the pancreas, and it's caused by an insufficient secretion of insulin. So, and then we have resistance of the body cells to the effects of insulin. So when we speak kind of colloquially or in layman's terms, we talk about diabetes. People think of a diabetic patient being, the typical adult, obese, older adult. However, we know that there are 2 types of diabetes. We have type 1 diabetes, 2 types of diabetes mellitus. We have type 1 diabetes, which can develop suddenly, and it was known as juvenile diabetes, and usually develops before the age of 15. Causes of type 1 diabetes, it's usually an autoimmune response that it destroys the beta cells being important as the cells that secrete insulin. Whereas type 2 diabetes, also known as adult onset, this usually occurs after the age of 40. However, we are seeing it in younger and younger patients, usually due to a sedentary lifestyle. Most kids are on their computers or playing video games, not going out, not participating in sports, as well as a really bad, crappy diet, eating junk food, eating a lot of sweet foods, carbohydrates, just overdoing it on junk. So we're seeing an earlier and earlier onset of type 2 diabetes and obesity. And usually obesity is linked to type 2 diabetes. Now in type 2 diabetes, cells have a lowered sensitivity to insulin, and they are controlled by dietary changes as well as regular exercise. So before, traditionally, type 1 diabetes was known as the insulin-dependent diabetes. Most type 1 diabetes need insulin or are treated with insulin to control their type 1 diabetes, whereas type 2 diabetes was known as non-insulin dependent diabetes because usually type 2 diabetes can be controlled again through dietary change and regular exercise. However, if it is not controlled by a lifestyle change, through diet and exercise, eventually type 2 diabetics can end up going on insulin to control their blood sugar. So, guys, make sure you're eating right. Make sure you have good diet, good balanced diet, as well as getting enough regular exercise. So guys, I'm going to stop here because it's gotten a little long, so I'm going to divide the endocrine PowerPoint and lecture video into 2 parts. So this will be the end of part 1 of the endocrine chapter.